Hey guys, welcome back. How are you? I hope you are good and doing well. So, in this lecture, we are going to discuss an interview question which is about attribute, alias attribute, and the differences between both attribute and alias attribute. Okay, so this is the very basic thing, but the very important thing because you might face some situation at any point of development that where you have to customize the behavior of your active record object using some attribute. Okay, or you might have to call your attribute name, I mean the model's attribute name with a different name. Okay, so in that case you must know the uses of attribute, alias attribute, and what is the difference between both and when you need to use them. Okay, so that is the thing that we're going to discuss in this lecture. Okay, so let's start with the attribute. So let me take you to a demo application which I have in my local. So okay, so here you can see that I have a task model, and in the schema I have the tasks table where the attributes are number, title, and project ID, employee ID. Both are the foreign keys. So we will only consider the title for customizing the behavior of record of task model. Okay. So let's see. Let's start with the attribute. Okay. So first we will try to understand that what is attribute. Okay. So attribute are the custom fields or the virtual fields or virtual attribute. Why virtual? Because you can only use a attribute to change or customize the behavior of your active record object, but that virtual attributes value is not saved into the database. Rails will not allow you to do that, and Rails will not do that for you. Okay, for and how you can define the attribute? So you can define attribute with attribute keyword, attribute, and then you need to provide the name of your virtual attribute. Okay, so let's say we can provide description and its type. I mean, what is the type of the attribute? And if you wish, you can provide the default value as well, otherwise it will be considered as the nil. Okay, so let's say default. This is okay. So here you can see attribute, attribute name, attributes type, and then default value of the attribute. It depends that sometimes you need to provide the default value, otherwise it will be saved as the nil. Now, as I said that this is the virtual attribute, so you cannot save the value of this virtual attribute into the database. Okay, however, if I provide the default value, so it will be always stored as the blank string into the database, otherwise nil. Okay, but if you provide any dynamic value to this will be not saved into the database. Okay, now what you need to do as the next, that you define the custom attribute, and now let's say you want to populate this custom attribute behavior on the form. So for example, here you can see we have this title attribute or field for the title attribute. Okay, so let's use this for description as well. Description and text dot field description. Okay, now let's go to the browser. If we refresh the page and open the new task form in the model, you can see that we are seeing the value of this description. Okay, and along with that, what you need to do, you need to define your custom attributes into the params as well if you are using your virtual attribute into the form. Okay, if you do not provide this into the permitted params list, it will not be usable. Okay, but if you are using it in some internal calculation, I mean out of the form or within some callback, then it might be regardless to permit this. Okay, you can use it internally in your any kind of method or logic. Okay, now, since I said that we can use these virtual attributes to customize the behavior of our active record object, okay, so let's say we are not providing the value of title and we want to consider the description of the task as the title if it is blank. Okay, so let's say let's say before destroy or before save, sorry, before save, assign description as title. Okay, now we need to implement this method. So def assign description as title, and here what we will do, if self dot title dot blank. Okay, that means when the title of the task is blank, then what we will use, self dot description, sorry, self dot title equal to self dot description and end. Okay, so here you can see what this callback is doing. It will, whenever you submit the form, first this callback will be executed on the before save, and where it will check that if the title of the task is blank, then it will use the description of the task, which is the virtual attribute that we defined here. Okay, and if title is blank, then it assign the value of description to the task before save, so that whenever you save the task, it will be saved into the database as title. Okay, so now let's come to the terminal and make some space where the server is running. Okay, just to see the logs of a form submission. So now let's provide a task, let's say ebay management, and cmd, let's say 103, and let's keep the title blank and provide the description. So let's say test task 4. Okay, now make some space onto the, okay, we already make, and now let's submit the form. Okay, so you can see that the task 4 has been saved. Okay, but we did not provided the title. We, what we provided, we provided the value of description. And now come to the form. When you see the params, okay, when you see the form params, what we are getting: project id, number that we provided, title is blank, and description is test task, which is our custom attribute or the virtual attribute. Okay, but when you see the record insertion, you can see the title has been saved as test task 4. Okay, not the description. Okay, now let me show you on the uh, other terminal by opening the rails console. Okay, I just want to show you that these custom attributes will not be saved into the database if you define it using the attribute method. Okay, so if you can see task dot last, you can see here description is still empty. Okay, which is the default value that we provided here. Okay, and cmd 103 test task 4. Okay, and default value, for example, let's say if you want to define a fixed value to your virtual attribute, and you want to use that in some calculation, especially if your virtual attribute is, let's say, float or number type, and you want to use that as a constant for all of your record, so that you can get its value there. Okay, so you can choose the default definition based upon your requirement, but right now it is default, and you can see that the title has been saved, test task for, description is not. Okay, so this is the use of attribute. Okay, so first let's see how we can define attribute. Let me repeat it again. So we can define attribute using attribute method, then your attribute name, then its type, and if you need some default value, you can define it like that. Okay, and then you can use it to customize the behavior of your active record object or during some calculation. Okay, but keep in one thing mind that this virtual attributes value will not be saved into the database. Rails will not allow you to do that. Okay, but on the other hand, there is alias attributes. Okay, and alias attributes are the ways where we can allow our model to use the alias name or a replacement name for the actual name of the attribute. Okay, for example, we have the title attribute into the task table. Okay, so let's remove all this thing, for example, or let's comment this. Okay, so let's comment this now. Okay, and let's comment this part as well. Do not use it. Let's comment this one, and let's remove the description from the permitted params as well. Okay, because now we are using the alias attribute. Okay, now how we can define the alias attribute? So alias attribute. Okay, so this is also a method just like attribute method to define the to alias or existing attribute name. Okay, so let's say we want to alias the title. So what we can say, let's say task details. Okay, and then title. So what does it mean? That you want to alias an attribute which exists in the database with name as title within the task table, and you want to alias it with name task details. Okay, so whenever you do some work with task details or your alias attribute, it will actually stores, or it will actually consider your already existing name into the database, and it will assign its value to the database stored field. Okay, so what we have in the database title. Okay, now we have this alias attribute. So now let's try to use the on the console. Okay, so let's reload the Rails console. Okay, if you go to the task.class, you can see title. Now if you can see task details, you can see that it is returning the title. Okay, it is returning the title. That means we are using an existing field from the database and aliasing it with some different name. Now let's define a task. Let's say, let's initialize a new task. So task dot new, let's say task details, some task, and then project id, let's say 2, employee id, let's say 3, and then number, let's say 1 2 3. Okay, so if you see this initialized object, so you can see the title is stored as the sum task, not the task details. Okay, so what you are using your alias attribute to provide the values to the actual attribute which is saved into the database. Okay, but this functionality you cannot achieve with the attribute. Okay, now let me define the attribute again. Okay, attribute, and let's say we are using this one as well. Okay, so now reload the Rails console again. Task dot last, it is the description. Okay, now description is blank. Now let's define this task again, and here what we will do, that description. If you assign that, you can see that the description is stored as some task, but sorry, defined as some task, but it is not assigned to title is still nil. Okay, but when you defined it, initialize the object of task model using alias attribute, it immediately assign it to the actual name of the database, but the virtual attribute do not do that. Okay, so this is the first and key difference between that. What is the difference? That with attribute you can only use it at the virtual level, or for some calculation, or for customizing the behavior, but you cannot store that value into the database. For that you need to use the alias attribute, then only it will work. Okay, so this is the key difference. And the other thing is that with alias attribute you cannot change the type of the attribute which is already exist. You can just rename it, or as per your convenience. For example, here the task detail, sorry, the title is string format, so you cannot change the its type using alias attribute. You have to do this using migration, but with alias attribute you cannot do that. Okay, but virtual attributes you can define any kind of type to it, or you can define any default value to it. Okay, but with alias attributes you cannot do that. So this is the difference. So I hope you got the idea that what are attributes in Rails, what are default alias attributes in Rails, and what is the difference between that. Okay, so let's revise it again. So just the syntax that here you can see, this is the alias attribute where task details and title, and this is the attribute description, string default, and before save assign description as title. So this is just a rename of the existing attribute into the database. Okay, and this is just a virtual attribute, not into the database, but virtual attribute to use for some custom behavior or customizing the behavior of the active record object. Okay, so that's all for this. So whenever you have been asked this question, that what is attribute, what is alias attribute, and what is the big difference between them, I hope now you can answer them better. Okay, and even if you need at some point of development in your projects, you can simply follow that and you can simply use that. Okay, so I hope you like that, and we will meet into another lecture with another important interview question and very basic question. Till then, tata, goodbye, take care, stay safe.